I've owned several iPads over the years and made the same mistake every single time I try to use them as a Mac replacement. And let me tell you, that does not work, at least not if you're a video creator. But this time I got the smaller 11-inch iPad Pro M4, and instead of trying to replace my Mac, I started using it as an addition, and that completely changed how useful it is. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I use the iPad Pro M4 for video editing, color grading and filmmaking, and let you know what's great, what's still frustrating, and where Apple really needs to step up. One of the main things I use my iPad for is editing thumbnails, and the workflow is pretty simple. I start in Lightroom to edit the raw photo, then I bring it into Affinity Photo or Photoshop to add text and polish everything up. And now, I will be honest, I don't really like Photoshop. It's overpriced and it's unintuitive in my opinion, and I would love to ditch Adobe entirely, but the generative fill feature is just too good. Like, I don't use it in all of my thumbnails, but sometimes the background is a bit boring in some of my photos, and with generative fill, I can quickly add some elements to make it pop. So for now, I'm stuck with it, but the second another app, maybe Pixelmator or so, gets something as good, I'm out. And yeah, I could do all of this on my Mac, and sometimes I do, but I prefer using the iPad for that, especially when I'm working from the sofa and I want the work to feel less like work, and for that the iPad is just more convenient. The Apple Pencil also makes photo editing a bit nicer, but for that it's better to use it on a desk or at least with the Magic Keyboard or another stand, because then you have your hands free. So I would say if you have to edit lots of thumbnails or you're a photographer that edits on the go, the iPad Pro can be a pretty nice experience because you can change locations a bit easier, and it also gives you a bit different or more fun workflow. When it comes to video editing on the iPad Pro, I would actually like to start with Final Cut Pro instead of DaVinci Resolve, what I usually use, because that's, in my opinion, how editing on an iPad should be or feel like. Maybe a few months ago, you noticed that I gave a little shout out to a new channel called Leander Falk, which was actually a little test run where we tried a new way of scripted vlogging to tell better stories. And there we uploaded, I think 11 episodes or so in 1 month, which I edited all. So for that, I used Final Cut Pro to be faster, and I actually edited about 80% of one episode on the iPad just because I wanted to have a chill sofa editing day and also test the editing on the 11-inch iPad Pro a bit. And it worked just fine. It did take me a little bit longer than it would have taken me on my 16-inch MacBook Pro, but I also had to get used to the interface, so it was actually not too bad and kind of fun because it gives video editing a more gamified feel. Like, instead of having to use a keyboard and mouse, you can actually hold the iPad in both hands, use the jog wheel to scroll through the timeline and do all your cuts, etc., what makes it feel really iPad native, and it's quite fun to edit like that. And honestly, this is the kind of editing setup I wish I had back in 2016 when I was traveling the world, because I was quite often editing from hotel beds, and having something this portable with a touchscreen would have been a game changer, because let's be honest, using your MacBook Pro, even if it's an Air, on your lap while lying in bed is not precisely comfortable. But I have to say that Final Cut Pro on the iPad still kind of sucks, and let's be real, it shouldn't even have Pro in the name. My biggest problem with it is that there is no proper color grading. You can't even use LUTs, so if you want to do anything beyond basic edits, you will need to either finish on a Mac or export your project to DaVinci Resolve on iPad. And even when exporting XMLs to Final Cut for Mac, it's not great, as audio keyframes, for example, don't transfer properly. So if you're working between devices, that's another headache. And there also doesn't seem to be an iPad native way to export XML files to Resolve for color grading. So you can essentially only do very basic edits without transitions or so, export the full video as a ProRes file to Resolve, and use automatic scene detection to be able to color grade all the clips individually. What also sucks is that you can't use the inspector settings if you have multiple clips selected. So if you only want to do basic color corrections, you have to go through every single clip and select the color processing mode. The same goes for scale to fill. If you use a different aspect ratio from your footage, that could work so much faster by being able to do those adjustments on multiple clips at the same time, or at least define standardized settings. So that's really something Apple has to improve. Those are must-have features in my opinion, and I mean all other decent iPad video editing apps have these features without using Pro in their name. On the other hand, one thing that's actually pretty cool though is the Apple Pencil drawing feature. If you don't know yet, you can draw or write anything you want and Final Cut automatically animates it, and you can not only use these animations in Final Cut projects but also export them as ProRes 444 files with transparent backgrounds, what allows you to use them in other video editing apps. That's a nice creative feature that can give your videos a more personal touch. So yeah, Final Cut Pro on iPad is a fun experience and the performance is actually really solid, no lags, even with demanding footage. But Apple really needs to step it up, add LUTs, proper color grading tools, better XML exports and support for third-party plugins, then it might actually deserve the Pro in the name. Now, when it comes to DaVinci Resolve, I've already talked about DaVinci Resolve on the iPad Pro before in my iPad Pro 12.9-inch review. Honestly, the bigger screen makes a huge difference, but aside from that, I feel like there's no difference at all, even about 2 years later. Now that I'm using the 11-inch iPad Pro M4, I tried doing some very basic editing on the cut page. And well, I still got occasional crashes, so I really wouldn't recommend using Resolve for fully editing videos on an iPad, at least not yet. But where it does shine is definitely for color grading, obviously. If I edit something in Final Cut Pro on the iPad or in Resolve on my MacBook, I can do the color grade on the iPad. I would say the screen is a bit small for advanced grades with power windows, etc. But for relatively normal color grades for social media, it's definitely enough. However, when it comes to editing and color grading your videos in Resolve on the iPad, there is actually a workflow you can use if you only want to bring your 11-inch iPad Pro on your travels. And that's a workflow I used last year when I went to Indonesia. There I left my MacBook at home and only brought the 11-inch iPad Pro to save weight. And the way I made it work was pretty simple. I used DaVinci Resolve to create proxy files and upload them automatically to Blackmagic Cloud. From there, my editor could access the files on his computer and also the whole project. So he handled the main edit, and then I finished it up with some last tweaks and color grading on Resolve for iPad. And that works really nice because everything syncs automatically, not just the files, but also the timeline. If I wanted to, I could literally watch him edit the video live and even message him while doing so. Now, if you're planning to do something similar, there is one important point to note, which is that the files have to be on the internal iPad storage for them to sync properly. If they are on an external SSD, it won't work. So if you will have to handle lots of footage, you might want to invest in an iPad with a bit more space, probably even 1 or 2 terabyte versions, just to make sure that everything works there, that's not full. So yeah, this is actually a great solution for creators on the go, at least if you're working with an editor. You can do quick edits, prep your footage, and then finish things up wherever you are without carrying a full laptop setup. And honestly, if your videos are quite simple to edit, you can find editors on the internet that are not super expensive, so that's actually a great solution. By the way, if you use your iPad mainly for editing photos and videos and storing your files on the go, you can actually save quite a bit of weight by not using the Magic Keyboard. Instead, you can just get something like that leather case here, which Harbour London sent me a few months ago. So I thought, let's give them a little shout out, because it's a very nice and minimalistic case made out of actual leather with some fleece inside here to protect your iPad. And it also holds the Apple Pencil, because let's be honest, the magnetic connection isn't always reliable. I really like this case, it's quite durable, so if you're looking for one, I will link it in the description below. So video editing is one of my use cases for the iPad Pro 11-inch, at least to a certain degree, but there are quite a few more. One of the biggest advantages of the M4 iPad Pro is its HDR screen. Apple calls it Tandem OLED, and honestly it's the best HDR display you can get in a consumer device right now. That makes it really useful for HDR color grading, especially if you don't have a professional HDR monitor. My Apple Studio display, for example, can't properly grade HDR because it's not bright enough, so instead I just use my iPad Pro as an HDR reference monitor while I work on my studio display. It's super simple to set up. Just go into the display settings, set the iPad to reference mode, then mirror or extend your display from your MacBook, and in DaVinci Resolve turn on video clean feed for your iPad Pro, and now you've got an HDR preview directly on your iPad. If you want a full tutorial on how to color grade HDR properly, I made a video about it, which I will leave a link here in the corner and also in the description below. Another way I use the iPad Pro is as a camera monitor when I'm filming at home, like I'm doing right now here, because having a bigger screen makes it way easier to see everything clearly, especially when framing shots or checking focus. Now, that might not sound super important, but I had it quite a few times over the years that something wasn't right in some of my shots, like cables hanging around or something else messed up. And by simply using a bigger screen, such as an iPad, it's much easier to see and therefore avoid that. If you're using Sony's Creators app or some others, you can even start and stop recording remotely, which is quite useful when filming yourself, as oftentimes the camera stands a bit too far away, like right now here, more than arm's length. And for more advanced features, there is, for example, the Monitor Plus app. This app gives you anamorphic desqueeze, focus peaking, and a bunch of other useful tools, making the iPad a solid monitor even on a film set. Now, the problem with that usually is that the Wi-Fi connection isn't very stable between cameras and iPads or your phone. So what you can do to make it better, at least at home or in other stationary setups, is to set your local Wi-Fi up inside the camera instead of using its default connection, so that your camera connects to your iPad via your local Wi-Fi network instead of directly by creating a new and usually quite weak one. And that gives you a much faster and more stable signal, and also connects your camera quicker right after turning it on. So that's how I use the iPad Pro at home or in hotels, but I also use it outside, but for something else, my shot lists. When I'm out shooting, I like to keep a shot list to make sure I don't forget anything, and for that I usually use my iPad instead of my phone, because phone screens are just a bit too small. It's because my shot lists are sorted in tables inside Notion or CraftDocs, which means a lot of horizontal scrolling on an iPhone, while on the iPad I can see everything at once without constantly having to swipe around. It's also a really nice setup when I'm filming outdoors, because I usually set up the iPad somewhere I can sit, and that way I can comfortably check my list, see which shot I need next, and tick everything off as I go. And I also use it for something else on the go, which is script writing and planning videos. And of course, I enjoy working on scripts while sitting in a cafe or just being somewhere outside a lot. So that's actually how my usual Monday looks like, just going somewhere to plan my videos and write scripts. Now, if I'm at home, I would rather use my MacBook for that. It's just a better experience overall. But when I'm heading out to film in the morning, for example, and write a bit later while I'm sitting in a cafe, I really don't want to carry that extra weight, and that's where the iPad Pro is perfect. It's light, portable, and certainly good enough for writing scripts. Right now I'm using CraftDocs to write and plan my videos. I used to use Notion before because its organization system is the best, but CraftDocs is just a bit faster, looks nicer, and recently got a database upgrade that makes it more like Notion, but not exactly the same. It's still not as powerful though, so if your videos are more complex, then Notion is still the better choice. And by the way, if you use Notion, check out my Notion template for organizing your videos. videos. It's pretty cool because it centralizes everything. So you can, for example, create shot lists for multiple videos on their project pages. And in the centralized shot list view, you can filter by location. So when you film at a certain location for multiple videos, you don't forget any shots that would usually be hidden on other project pages. So if you use Notion and that sounds interesting, check it out. I will leave a link in the description. There is one more thing I really wish we had on iPads though for video planning, and that's a TubeBuddy extension for iPad, because that would make keyword research so much easier on the go. So yeah, after using the iPad Pro this way, I actually think it's a really useful tool for video creators, as long as you don't expect it to replace a Mac, and ideally use the 11-inch version, because that really focuses on the portability aspect of this device. But I'm curious, how do you use your iPad for video work, or do you think it's still not worth it for creators? Let me know in the comments. And if you do want to edit on an iPad in DaVinci Resolve, I made a video with 10 tips for that. You can check it out right here in the corner. Of course, also don't forget to subscribe, and I see you in upcoming videos.